I want to get into your book, History of Redundant Moments, which immediately sets the tone with the title Redundancy, Failure, Repetition. Uh, I should rephrase it. You write that a failed insurrection and its broken archives, the past, present, and future half loves, half convictions, the shame and embarrassments of half beliefs. There's something sharp about the phrasing half loves, half convictions, half beliefs. What drew you to this idea of redundant moment? Uh, in a broader sense, because we have seen Sadia Hartman talk about uh, the archive as filled with silences and those things, and you're coming at this with the redundant moment, and I really appreciated that.
Yeah, yeah. So yes, I mean there are a lot of things that were inbuilt into this kind of idea of redundant moments. One of the things is, if you read this book, it's I mean it's an effort to see the world through children's eyes, right? And especially these two little
Mm,
girls who happen to be twins. So, in some ways, we think of children's lives as unimportant, as essential but redundant, right? Little girls,
hmm
even more so, especially in the subcontinent. No one thinks about little girls as political agents, as political subjects. So, there is that kind of harping back, a certain kind of irony built into that. But there is also something about, I mean, I kind of academically came of age during that moment of everyday modes of resistance. So James Scott. Um, and I mean, whereas I do love a lot of the things that James Scott was doing, I am extremely uncomfortable in the way James Scott's work was appropriated by the American academic institutions and American
hmm
formal uh, anthropology, formal social sciences. And it almost became a way of advocating de-radicalization, demobilization. So as long as the employees bitch about their employer over a cup of coffee or a drink, they're
Yeah,
resisting, right? So let's not
yeah,
form unions. Let's not ever go to the picket lines. Let's just bitch over coffee about our boss,
yeah.
and that's somehow resistance. And I'm not saying that is not resistance, but how that easy understanding of resistance actually caused huge amounts of injury to the American Union movement, to American academia. I think that you are living through that moment. I mean, we all are living through that moment. So what I was thinking that, wait a minute, so social movements do have their everyday, right? There are
hmm
extremely unspectacular moments inbuilt into the social movements. So social
yeah.
movements, even of the most violent kind, are never really about the spectacle. They're never really about that. The spectacle might be a moment. No one actually talks about the everyday unspectacular work that goes on behind every political spectacle, say a rally, a coming together of some kind of performative protest. And
hmm
so this idea of every day seemed very problematic to me, while at the time being extremely essential. So I was also trying to point out to these redundant moments in our political lives, which would never really go into the political histories, into our official histories of radicalisms. And radical movements do have their official histories, right? So the
Yeah.
and much of that work actually happens inside homes, inside the domestic spaces. And I'm not advocating that. I'm not saying that women should actually be relegated to the domestic space, cooking food for the revolutionaries and offering them kind of that emotional material sustenance. But that's how it has historically happened. And those are the redundant moments. So what are the kind of the discontents of those redundant moments? So what are the
hmm
processes through which these two little girls and who are very different from each other, who actually begin to witness those processes and who actually begin to think through these processes in very different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you see a part of your poetry as sort of looking to recover what has been lost uh, or exposing what was never whole to begin with? You know, in
Yes.
terms of uh, in terms of these lives, especially in the gendered context, like women in that sense, like they're missing from a lot of narratives around. Yeah.
Right, yes, I mean, absolutely. And I think that the women writers have done an incredible amount of work globally, but especially the subcontinent, in Urdu, in Bangla, in English too, in actually retrieving those histories, right? So, and
Hmm.
I'm sure that when we sit together with a cup of chai, we can keep on reciting these great lines and poems by both Urdu and Bengali women writers who have done this enormous amount of heavy lifting. But
Hmm.
I think, as far as poetry is concerned, especially South Asian poetry, the lives of the little girls remain relatively unexplored. So childhood is talked about in two ways. One in a very nostalgic kind of a way, and it makes sense. I mean, childhood is possibly the only time when most women feel a little bit at home inside their bodies and at home
Yeah.
with the home at large, right? So
Yeah.
that space becomes that space of romanticism, that space becomes the space of nostalgia. The one moment that is written about a lot is that period of menstruation, so that sexual coming of age, but not necessarily with the sexual act, but with the realities of the female body. So if you see
Yeah.
that I have refused to write about sexuality or the sexual coming of age in this book, there is no reference to this girl's um, getting their menstruation, and it's kind of set in this time when they're really little. But that's the period, I think, that is oftentimes lost from women's poetry. And I also didn't necessarily want to write about childhood or girlhood in this romantic kind of a way, but I wanted to write about the violences of girlhood, violences that the family thrusts upon the little girls, the violences that they do to each other, and just the kind of the violence of the world, but also the fun, right? The playfulness of that
Yeah.
time in girls' lives. So sneaking out of
Yeah.
home, um, coming across, and I think a lot of these things are lost, right? So I was literally writing about the pre-liberalization era, the street fairs, where you do get
Yeah.
to see these weird things, which I would describe as South Asia's own forms of surrealism. So a lot of the things I have written about are not necessarily
Interesting.
surrealist at all. They're very real, but they're South Asia's realisms.
Yeah. No, that's really well put. So just to keep the conversation moving, I'm gonna jump back to Rebot Facilities,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
you write the city is an exercise in incongruence,
right.
unmaking of the photocopy of what came before. That line seems to read to me as like a manifesto in the sense that does poetry intervene in the archive in your mind, or does it just expose its failure? In a way.
I mean, it's both, right? So if you think
Um.
of that breaks a great word, that manifesto is coarse writing. In lots of
Mhm.
ways, I think my writing is very coarse, and I'm
Mhm.
perfectly fine with that. I don't want that porcelain feeling of much of MFA poetics, right? So,
Yeah.
and I think that, it's funny, when I first came across the MFA workshops, one of the things that would be repeatedly asked to me, that where is the conflict in your poems? And I found it
Mhm.
to be fascinating because I have always seen United States, the American society, to be a society where it's not that there aren't any conflicts, but where all the conflicts are resolved very, very quickly in and through capital, right? So, and the conflicts keep on circulating and they kind of keep moving through these
Mhm.
circles, uh, and ultimately um, completely dissolve into these extremely status quo solutions. So to think of conflict as the central element of American poetics, it didn't make sense to me. But then what I
Yeah.
recognized that what